Physical abilities such as strength, speed, agility, endurance, and coordination are fundamental in sports. But mental abilities such as focus, concentration, motivation, confidence, resilience, and decision-making can heavily influence an athlete's performance, especially when it matters the most. If you want the mental edge in sport and life, check out the Max Out Mindset for Volleyball book and workbook or the Max Out Mindset for Softball book and workbook. A guide for coaches, athletes, teams, and parents to help you be in the best position to max out when it matters the most. Go to www.maxoutmindset.com.
You're listening to Max Out Mindset with your host, Dr. Larry Widman, performance psychiatrist and elite mindset coach to women in sports, business, and life.
Welcome to the Max Out Mindset podcast. This is your host, Dr. Larry Widman, sometimes known as Doc in the mindset world. I'm here along with Coach Jess Connect, an elite mindset coach. And we always say that we do this podcast because we've been blessed over the last couple of decades to work with some of the greatest athletes, coaches, leaders, and teams in the country. And so we love to share what we learn from them and also what we teach them. And then, of course, when we have a guest on, spend most of our time learning from them. I always say my definition of maxing out is given the talent, the health, the depth, and the experience of a team or an individual, or really any high performer. Can that person or team reach the limits of their capabilities? And then can they do it under pressure when it matters the most? Because we always say, if you can't do it when it matters, what's the point? And of course, I mentioned that we're really lucky to have a guest on today by the name of Mia Lind. She's the founder of the Hot Girl Walk. She is a graduate of USC with a BA in communications, a minor in business. And we are thrilled to have you on the Max Out Mindset podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Larry. I'm excited to share my story and also learn a little bit from you as the pro.
Well, we're really excited to have you too, because we've talked with a lot of people in the podcast the last couple of years that aren't directly athletes or playing athletics right now. But when we talk to high performers in life and sport, we really get a lot of feedback about the overlap between those two or anything that it takes to be a high performer. You heard my definition of maxing out. When you think about maxing out as a person, as a high performer, could you put into words what you think about that?
Yeah, so I'm a type A person, so I may not be a competitive athlete. I grew up dancing, but pretty competitively, but I wasn't good enough to be super competitive at it. And so when I think about maxing out, especially as a young woman in my daily life, I worked in corporate for a very long time. So being able to perform and reach your own potential and what that means to you without being limited by what normally limits people, which can be typically fear or a lack of confidence. I always personally think that fear can be the number one person to hold them back from their full potential.
I love that. So we're going to get into fear and confidence because those are things we talk about a lot. Fear being a barrier, confidence being one of our elite mindset ingredients. Can you just put into words, what is the Hot Girl Walk?
So the Hot Girl Walk is a 4-mile outdoor mindfulness walk where you're only allowed to think about 3 things. First, the things you're grateful for. Next, your goals and how you're going to achieve them. And last, of course, how hot you are, or I always say confidence because, how hot you are is a little tongue-in-cheek. But it's all about building confidence through mindful movement in the form of an outdoor walk.
So that's what the Hot Girl Walk is. Now, put into words for us why you started the Hot Girl Walk.
So I started the Hot Girl Walk during COVID. I was a senior at USC. I was very high performing in college. I had multiple extracurricular activities. I was president of my sorority. I had an internship. I was looking to go into the real world, and what the real world meant was very blurry given the pandemic at the time. And so it was 2020. I was at home juggling all of the extracurriculars, and I felt a lot of stress and anxiety as, one normally does, but leveled up because of the circumstances of the world. And I really was looking for a way to deal with that negative stress. And I love exercising. I love dancing, but all of that was not able to happen because everything was closed down. And so I said to myself, you know what? Why don't I just go out? I lived in a neighborhood that happened to be 4 miles. And I said, why don't I just go out and go on a walk? It might take some time, but an hour and a half of walking doesn't sound that bad. But the one thing that stopped me was fear. I was stopped because I would say to myself, well, what happens if, God forbid, I'm left for a minute without my phone, without TikTok scrolling, without Netflix playing, numbing my thoughts? And God forbid, what if I have to listen to my own thoughts? What am I going to do? So I had taken a class in high school called The Science of Happiness, which is based off of a UC Berkeley class led by scientist Dacher Keltner, I believe his name is, but I can confirm that. And essentially, he said the secret to happiness was gratitude. So I said, he must know what he's talking about. So I'm going to just go out there and start with a little bit of gratitude practice, get my mind off of all of the stuff that's going on in the world that's really stressing me out. And that seems super important to me. When you're a college student, everything feels like the biggest thing in the world. But when you really boil it down, you realize you have a lot more positive in your life than you have negative. So I went out and I started with that gratitude practice, and I naturally went into thinking about the things in my life that I had done that I was proud of. And as a woman, I often found myself naturally thinking about my achievements, but knocking myself down with them, giving myself imposter syndrome, saying, well, yeah, I was president of my sorority, but I had a lot of help and, I didn't really deserve it. I was the only one that ran, and just all that negative monologue that I would naturally put on myself. I allowed myself instead on my hot girl walks to think about my achievements and not let myself naturally shrink those accomplishments, and left humble at the door and just said, you know what? I'm going to own my accomplishments. I'm going to own everything and be really proud of all the stuff that I achieved. I knew I had to go into interviews, so I knew I had to talk about my achievements in a positive light. So naturally think about that. And then I would think about, what's next for me? How am I going to get there? And by the end of all that, I was feeling great. I would come back from my walks and my parents would say, where did you go? And I was like, well, I just came back from my hot girl walk. And that's how I kind of came up with hot girl walk and the phrase hot girl walk, which really hit the internet and took the internet by storm. And so that's kind of how I created the hot girl walk. I was encouraged to post about the hot girl walk because I was sharing my process with my friends, and they were like, you need to post about this on TikTok. People are going to love it. So I had a little bit of a moment of vulnerability, and I shared my process on social media, and the rest is history. That video has millions of views, and the hashtag on TikTok is in the billions with a B.
Wow. That's quite a story, isn't it, Coach Jess? So she's told us what the hot walk is. Pretty great at articulating why she started it. What do we want to know next, Jess? I know you've been sitting here thinking, and I know you can relate to everything she's saying. It's how you talk and think about the world quite a bit too. But what are your thoughts, Jess?
Mia, one, I know you hear this a lot probably, but I think there are a lot of people that are so proud of you because you came from a moment of sheer vulnerability with yourself in 2020, and you're able to create something that meant something's really special to you, use the power of social media, and then now you're here today, successful, right? I know that there's millions of people that you're reaching and blessing with just something that you were very personal with in 2020. And I just want to say thank you. And I say that I'm proud of you because empowering other females is so important. And there's a lot that we can learn from you today, and specifically on confidence and that hot girl walk. It is a phrase, but you live it every day. And that's something that's super authentic. And we talk about that a lot at Max Out Mindset. And so my question for you is, when you first started out and you were going on those 4 miles, how did you own your thoughts, whether they would be positive or negative? How mindful were you, and how much of a consistency did it take for you to start turning that into a positive mantra or maybe a positive action?
That's a really great question because I distinctly remember, and I still honestly struggle with it on a daily basis. It's not something that is natural for, I think, anybody. I think everybody has those moments of negativity. And the way that I've been able to kind of overcome that, and the way that I am able to overcome it on a daily basis, I think the word practice really sticks out to me there, because I always thought, at least for myself, I wasn't born a confident person. I struggled a lot with my confidence in my life, and I really owned that phrase, fake it till you make it. And I think practicing that confidence over and over and over made it really familiar to me. And even if I were on my own in my walk, practicing the words coming out of my mouth that I am confident, I'm proud of this that I've done, made it easier to say in front of other people for me. And so when I'm out and I have these negative thoughts, I almost treat them as another person, another part of me, almost one of my friends, because that part of myself, or that part of you, I think has a purpose. I think that internal critic is really there for sometimes a really great reason. Internal critics pushed me to places I never thought I could go. You can do better than that. You can be better. But, with every positive, there's a negative. And I think that's the perfectionist and, high performing people, that I listen to that person and I respond without judgment. I don't let myself feel bad that I feel that way. I think letting yourself sink into that negative spiral can, that can be the end. Once you start letting yourself, go down and down and down and say, yeah, no, she's right. I say she because, again, they're like third person. But, I listen, I hear what they're trying to say to me. And if that's, serving me, I take note from it. But I also, respond back and say, well, no, that's not necessarily true. Or, that might be helpful another time. But at this current time, I'm trying to have a good moment. I'm trying to have an hour that isn't about negative or isn't about stress. And can you just let me have an hour? And if you still feel that way in an hour, sure, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. See, it's like almost like a conversation, but I'm happy to talk about it at a later time. But right now, just let me have an hour. And then I find that doesn't really come back.
I like that you call that out. We train our coaches, our teams in an elite mindset, and you are an elite, right? Leader, you're an elite in business, you're elite, you have that communication background, which I think is really awesome that wasn't wasted part of your undergrad, and it makes you so successful today. But we teach a lot about commitment is our first C. Our second C is confidence. And I think that's where we really relate right now. And my question would be is, you said, one, you're committed to being mindful, that you're acknowledging, hey, that's a negative thought, referring it in a third person or another person. And two is you just talked about consistency, continuing to acknowledge, right, hey, that thought isn't serving me. I'm going to take an hour if I need to revisit or if I need to change anything. You are super engaging. And I think teaching athletes, right, especially struggling with some of the negative thoughts for their performances, we can't deny it. But how can we reframe our thought into a positive one? And you just spoke on consistency, and I thought that was really cool. 4 miles is not short. So being in your thoughts for 4 miles, right? Was there something you did to help your brain refocus if your thoughts would wander? Because you said, do you listen to music? Do you recommend music? Or maybe what do you recommend on those 4 miles?
I actually really do recommend music. I have a playlist that has a bunch of followers and a bunch of saves and everything like that. But the reason I really like that playlist is because, one, it's a high tempo, so it's going to keep your feet going. But it's stuff that's like, honestly, I grew up dancing and I grew up loving music and finding solace in it. And I love to go out at night and get my dance moves out on the dance floor. But, I might not be dancing. Sometimes you'll catch me dancing on the sidewalk, but I love that upbeat, dance music where there's so much music that is really positive and almost blatantly positive, which as women, I feel like we don't really we don't really say very often, but there's a lot of music that has that kind of message. So whenever I feel my thoughts kind of wandering, I ensure really to listen to music that is, upbeat. Because if you're gonna put on like Bonnie Iver or I mean, I love some good Taylor Swift, but she has some sad ones. So if you're gonna put, All Too Well on, that's not help your thoughts go anywhere good. And so that's one thing that I really rely on. And then if I do feel myself really slipping, I'll just go back to that gratitude practice because there is always something that you can be grateful for. I mean, a lot of the time that gratitude is, I'm glad I can go out and walk for 4 miles. And I'm proud that I got myself out of bed or wherever I was to go and I get here. Because oftentimes that's the hardest part, just to get yourself outside. So I've done the hard thing. Now all I need to do is right and left or left, right, whatever suits you.
Keeping it simple. And you're right, the
Mhm.
courage to start. Doc,
Yeah.
what are some thoughts? She's sharing a lot of great things, a lot of things that align with what we teach.
Yeah, well, two things I wanted to ask you first off. Let's start with gratitude for a minute. For somebody who's never practiced it before, what do you recommend to them who has never really experienced a way to do it? Like, how do you recommend them doing it so it doesn't feel overwhelming, but by the end of that walk, they do feel that they have been working on and practicing how to be grateful within those moments?
I think if you're a beginner at it, I think it's only a few words. I'm grateful for blank. And just starting out really small and look around you. You don't even need to think of the things in your life that you have. Just look around. Oftentimes, my first pieces of gratitude I think of are, I'm really grateful the grass is looking extra green today. And just noticing these things, and that integrates a lot of, mindful and meditation aspects. But just noticing things like that can help you reframe your headspace and to kind of pull yourself into a little bit of more perspective. I live by a really busy park where there's a lot of kids running around, which might be overwhelming to some, but I almost kind of think like, I'm grateful that I'm surrounded by an incredible, group of people. I mean, I think watching other people live their lives has a really incredible power of perspective and seeing them, like and recognizing, they have their own struggles. They have their whole entire lives, but they also have things in their life that they're grateful for. And so kind of reframing your head and to realizing, what, you're very special, but you're also one person in a really large sea of the world, and the grand scheme of the world and what exists around you is great, and you're in contribution of that greatness.
I love that. So again, let's stick with beginners for a minute who might feel that a 4 mile walk is overwhelming. What do you recommend for them? And then as we get better, how do you break that into chunks for them? We always talk about when we set goals that human beings, one of the things they can do is break them into reasonable subparts, and whatever it may be. If you want to save $1,000, you start by saving $50 and getting to 100. You break it into chunks, something that's manageable. What do you recommend again to beginners who may not have had a background in dance or maybe aren't as young and fit, but man, they're like, no, I want to do this. Like, I love what she stands for, but I want to do it. What do you recommend to them?
Well, I'm a big Atomic Habits fan. I actually just finished Atomic Habits at the beginning of this year. And so I was able to reframe a lot of what I was thinking because I had hit a little bit of a hawker walk rut. And so I incorporated a lot of that into my life. And so I can understand where people are coming from. And a lot of people come to me. I host events. I host hawker walks in LA, Miami, New York, and Australia. And people come to me all the time, how do I get to the 4 miles? And I recently started a little series on TikTok where I share that I walk 15 to 20,000 steps a day. And what's really funny is people are always asking me how do I hit this 4 miles? Or how do I hit this 15,000 steps? And I'm like, you realize that number is very arbitrary. And that 4 miles just came because it was the length of my neighborhood. And 15,000 steps happened to be something for me where, after a few days of, trying out different lengths of hawker walks and some different goals that I was trying out. So those numbers are really arbitrary. And I like to, oh my gosh, I'm going to butcher this quote. So I don't think I'm going to quote it, but a famous economist said, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a good measure. And what essentially that means is, when you get so fixated on, this number and this distance, you forget why you're doing it in the first place. The real goal of the Hawker Walk is to build confidence and to be grateful and to just get outside and get moving. And so I totally agree with starting out with, smaller bits and smaller chunks, and whatever distance for you that you feel like you can achieve those three kind of pieces of the methodology, which are gratitude, goals, and confidence. I break it up into those three words. So even 10-minute walks, 20-minute walks throughout the day, start with 1 10-minute walk in the day, then go for 2 10-minute walks in your day. And again, starting out with those little chunks, you may start to realize, well, I actually feel really good today. I'm going to go walk. You don't even realize you can do it. And you just walk for an hour and you didn't even know that you had that in you, but your goal was to get out there for 10 minutes. And you said, well, I'm already out here. I'm going to go for an hour or whatever. And so breaking it up in something that is a real Goldilocks area of achievable and challenging, because you want it to be something that you can do. I was in sales for a long time too. And so my manager would always tell me, hey, don't make a goal to call 100 people today. Make a goal to call 10 people today. And I was like, that's great, because I don't want to call 100 people today. But something that doesn't make you dread getting out of bed and doing this task, but something that is, again, equally challenging, that excites you.
Yeah, I love that. So we've talked a little bit of gratitude, a little bit of goals. I'm leaving the third part for you and Jess to talk a little bit about what does it mean to be hot. But I sensed listening to you, and then I'm going to throw it back to Jess, that obviously you started this during a very stressful time for you and, obviously most people in America. For people that are in struggle now, but it's unrelated to COVID, can you put into words the feedback you've gotten from people who are struggling mentally or emotionally, either with a mental health condition or just situational stress, how the Hot Girl Walk has impacted them in a positive way?
Yeah, there's a few ways that I've heard people come to me and telling me how their life has changed. A few messages early on, I remember one woman reached out to me and said, hey, just wanted to let you know I haven't gotten out of bed in 3 months. And the first time I got out of bed was to go on a Hot Girl Walk. Just hearing these people with really difficult challenges in their lives, and how I don't know where this young woman lives. I don't know anything about her, but to know that I've reached people in such a powerful way is unbelievable. And that's the power of social media, really. I mean, it can be used for a lot of bad, and it often is used for a lot of bad, but it can be used for a lot of good. And I also, because I do these events, I hear in person from people who hawk or walk on their own time. And then, I've created this community, and they share how this community has helped them as well, because there is a really important aspect of community that, one, I've built digitally, but now I'm able, because of now, restrictions and everything, obviously it started with COVID, but now we're able to bring it in and make it a physical community. But I can think of several instances. I think on my last hawker walk, I spent the entire hour with tears in my eyes, because this woman was telling me her story about her 3-year-long battle with cancer, and she had just rung the cancer bell. And I mean, it was just an incredibly powerful story that I can't believe she was vulnerable enough to share with me. And just sharing that as somebody who is now not in the same condition she was at the beginning of that journey, that this is the place that she can go and this is the place that she can be. It was just an unbelievable story, and almost just, it's just overwhelming to hear how really then my problems seem illegitimate. Just totally, I'm like, I can't even believe that I started the Hawker Walk because I was stressed about, this boy that didn't like me or whatever was going on in my life, that these people with real struggles and challenges and really just intense challenges, that they found solace in something that I've created and I've brought to them. And even people that are like, I've been following Hawker Walk for a really long time, and I went through this now like really challenging thing, and I actually tried the gratitude, goals, and confidence thing, and I was kind of shocked to hear that, like to see that it really like works. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of like the whole thing. That's what I've been preaching. But between my digital community and then my in-person community, I'm really humbled to connect with people and to hear their stories and how Hawker Walk has impacted them. And I mean, it's really incredible, the stories that I hear. And it's just incredible.
Yeah. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Jess, what are your thoughts?
No, Mia, you're hitting on a lot of things, and I could listen and continue to hear more of your stories. And I like that you have different communities, but I think you touched on community in general is important. We need each other. We need to hear each other's stories. And there's a lot of vulnerability. I think you birthed this Hot Girl Walk right out of your own vulnerability. Now you're able to hear some of your community's vulnerability. And oftentimes when we're talking with athletes and coaches, we are trying to erase the stigma, right? The vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's actually a strength. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you, in your world, right? When you have vulnerability, how does that impact confidence? And can they both coexist at the same time?
I think that's really incredible. I've actually never even thought about that way, how vulnerability can be an asset. And I think in my Hawker Walks with my community and really seeing this in-person community grow and thrive, I'm seeing that more and more. And in a microcosm way, in my Hawker Walks, I open my Hawker Walk with a cheer. And it feels ridiculous when I'm up there with my hot pink megaphone bedazzled because I'm owning myself. I know I love my hot pink. And so I'm just up there by myself. I'm getting dead stares back. And I'm like, all right, we're all going to do a cheer. And I let myself, be vulnerable, put my own walls down and be ridiculous because it's a Hawker Walk. It's not a 10K. It's not a 5K. We're walking in our pink to be friends and just to have fun on a Saturday morning. And so I do my little cheer, and I can do it with you all right now if you want to, join me.
Oh,
so I would say,
I'm in.
Repeat after me. It goes, ain't no walk.
Ain't no walk.
Like a hot girl walk.
Like a hot girl walk.
Because a hot girl walk don't stop.
Because a hot girl walk don't stop.
And we're on Zoom, so we won't be able to do it all together. It doesn't have the same pizzazz. But I open and I lead with that cheer, and it feels so dumb. But I'm used to feeling dumb because I grew up dancing and I did cheerleading, so I'm used to it. And I watched the walls of the community just completely drop. And the beginning, there's a little bit of, what's the word? Like a little tense, you're a little nervous. You're going out maybe alone to this thing. And you're like, oh, I don't really know. Maybe I should have brought my friend. She canceled on me last minute. Well, I don't know if I'm going to actually go out there. And we all just do this cheer. And I'm up there dancing. I encourage everyone to dance with me. And everyone just you just feel everyone relax. Mm-hmm. And so while I may not be the most, that's such like the interesting thing about community is I don't necessarily there's no competition. There's no who's the best, who's, the most impressive. And I grew up again in the dance world, and so that was very important. But in community, that's not important. And so I like to lead by example and just, let myself be the one who's going to be the first one to break through the shield of awkwardness and to be the one that introduces people to each other. And, I go up to everyone and I, ask how they got here and, whatever. And I break through that barrier and let people be vulnerable. And I've never heard about that way. And so that's a really interesting, mindset to be in. And I think it's especially prevalent with community.
I like this perspective because it's new, but you're living this out. You are owning your own authenticity, and it starts with that cheer. And it might not be comfortable every single time you do it. And you're owning that pink megaphone. You're getting outside your comfort zone, taking your time, right, and resources and visiting these cities, right, to bring that authenticity out and invite people in that. And to me, that is a strength. And as you can see, your community continues to build in person and digitally. One of the other key call outs I really liked is that you're not afraid anymore, right, to talk about and also listen to some of those vulnerable moments. I think sometimes we stray away from those and it gets scary. But when you're walking for 4 miles and you're owning your own self-talk and your own journey, you start to realize, hey, I'm pretty great. Mm-hmm. And I like that you mentioned earlier, Doc called it out, but you had I am statements. And that's what we also teach with our athletes and coaches. It's just those positive affirmations of reminding yourself of who you are. So I have a different perspective I want to dive in with you. What is one of the things this grew really rapidly and really fast for you, and it's still existing today? How do you continue, right, to know who you are with the amount of success that you're having? How do you continue to stay focused on that dream that you had back in 2020 and that moment that brought you today? How do you stay real?
So luckily, the thing that's brought me, all this success and all this fun stuff is also the thing I very much believe in and I practice on a daily basis. So not to be cliche, but my Hawker Walks are my space, because one of the biggest challenges I've had with this brand and with this community and, exploring the entrepreneurial world as a woman in particular, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of expectations, and it can be really challenging, and it can be, some of the most challenging stuff I've faced has been, with this, and, this is something that I really believe in, and the one thing that has continued to be the North Star, essentially, the guiding, light, has been Hawker Walk. Like, what is it? Why did I create this? And what does it mean? There's a lot of expectations around, what you should do. And of course, I'm existing on social media, and so there's a bunch of noise. But, just staying true to that. And again, just community and listening to how Hawker Walk has affected people helps just drive it all home and anchor me into why I did this. And I actually work on this business with my parents, my mom in particular. I'm very lucky to have that and to be supported in that way. My mom was the one who encouraged me to leave my corporate job to do this full time, which is very surprising to hear, right? Like, oh no, you should quit your corporate job and do your social media thing full time. It's very surprising to hear from, the older generation. So I'm very lucky to have that. And she encouraged me to file for the trademark, which was, all this, business kind of stuff that you don't really think about when you're just trying to go on your Hawker Walks. So I'm really lucky to have that. And my mom is she's Mama Bear. She is gonna protect me with whatever she's got. And I know her intentions are pure. And so I'm really lucky to work with my family in that way. And I think that's the real positive of family business. And I have a younger sister who's not going to she's not going to let anything slide. Very honest people. My mom's from New York, from Queens, New York. So they keep it real.
It's really cool because that parent role or that role of a family or guardian sounds like it impacted you a lot to continue to stay successful, to stay authentic, and to continue to develop that elite mindset that you have in business and in life. And so, if you don't mind me asking a little bit more, how do you keep your relationship with your family, right? You're a family, but you're also in business together. Are there one or two key things that you do healthy to make sure those relationships continue to grow in both of those sectors, as family, but also as business partners?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's kind of interesting is we've had a bit of practice at this from, being young. I mean, I'm the middle child. I have an older brother and I have a younger sister. My older brother was, these two, my siblings are your target demographic. My older brother was a nationally ranked fencer. He was on the Canadian national team. And my younger sister was competitive rhythmic gymnast and now is a professional dancer. And so I grew up kind of sandwiched between these two, high performers. And so most of my life, as, athletes, I'm sure you hear about that a lot. That's what the world revolves around because it should be. And it's really incredible what they both were doing and both continue to do. And all that energy and that focus was consistent across. Obviously they were doing all that. And when I was captain of my cheer team, there was an equal amount of focus on that. And so I'm lucky to have parents that were so invested in what we all were doing at the time. And I saw that investment throughout my entire life with, my competitive siblings as athletes. And so now as we kind of venture into this realm, I think a lot of that came with a little bit of maturity. When I was in college, I kind of had this realization that my parents are right a lot of times, which is really shocking when you're like early 20s. I was like, wow, these people, they kind of do know what they're talking about, and they've lived like 3 times the amount that I have. So maybe maybe they know what they're talking about. And realizing that they have experience and they have the best intentions at heart was a big game changer for me. And a lot of the times it's like, okay, mom, like I got it. And being able to, maturely accept like the critique and the criticism and all of that. And so we have a really good relationship, and my mom's taught me a lot on, how to stand up for myself. And so there's a lot of loud talking that goes on during the day, but it's all out of love. It's not, anything negative. And I also have my dad who's a really good mediator. So that's helpful too.
Great relationship from what I hear, and it's a work in progress, but they allow you to go and dream, and all of your siblings seem like they're elite as well in what they do. So thank you for sharing. Doc, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah, just a couple thoughts just listening to you guys. I sense there's an element of perfectionism as a high performer. Certainly comparison can easily come in. Not only did you live in a sandwich between two people that were elite, like you said, but then also your own journey. And of course, you brought up to us how social media can be a positive, but it could also be a negative. How have you navigated that space when you probably get some mean-spirited people at times, or negative pushback, or somebody saying or posting something that could be hurtful? So how do you navigate that when you're trying to just build this positive space?
Yeah, so this is a constant stream you've definitely nailed it on the head. I grew up with, quite a bit of perfectionism. I don't know if it's just the way I am or a product of being a middle child, but I think all of me and my siblings have that in us. But it's, it is something that's a constant work in progress. As, a business owner, perfectionism can be a real, it can really stunt you a lot of times. And so you have to kind of have that balance of, it might not be perfect, but I might as well just get it out there. And being able to continually create content is very, very difficult when you're a perfectionist. So kind of letting some of that go in a way to continue to, just get it out there. And if it's not perfect, we can just work on it later. My website might not have been perfect first time around, but, after a year of tweaking here and tweaking there, it's more to what I see the picture to be. And then with, navigating, hate and negativity on the internet, it is most of the time really easy to just kind of knock out. Like, you're clearly not educated on what I'm talking, like, you're clearly coming from a place of just sheer anger. You probably listened to the first 2 seconds of what I was saying and formed an opinion. And had you listened to 3 seconds, you would have immediately heard that your comment is completely invalid. So for me, that stuff, I'm like, okay, you're just like angry and you need to go on a hot girl walk yourself. And sometimes I really want to just say that to people, but I bite my tongue. I think, holding things back and letting myself, swallow things that I want to say was a skill I had to learn when I was president of my sorority. And that was a skill I learned there. I learned that if whatever decision you make is in the best interest of your community and you can then justify that decision, people might initially be angry at you for whatever reason, but when you can explain it, then you're good, right? Because people, are going to be angry no matter what, but for the most part, people are generally reasonable. And the other thing I learned was sleep on it. It might make you really angry and, you might have a little trigger finger with responding to, feedback on the internet, but you just kind of have to swallow it, wait for tomorrow, wait for those emotions to die down before you respond to something, even if you respond to something. And it really just requires a lot of perspective. I'm lucky to have people in my life that can provide that perspective for me. My boyfriend's really good and my friends are really good at doing that. Just saying like, no, like, don't even let that get to your head whatsoever. Hey, like, these people are just, coming from a place of hurt. And so having a good support system is really important, because people can be mean, like really mean, meaner than I've ever considered people to ever be. But, it is what it is. And that's the negativity that comes with being vulnerable and putting yourself out there, particularly with social media. But there's a lot more positive that comes out than negative. So I focus on that too.
Yeah. So just a couple of things and one last question I'm going to throw back to Jess. But you mentioned your boyfriend. So I got to give a shout out to Bryce. He's a good friend of my son Bennett's. And that's how we connected through this. And Bryce is one of my favorite people that I met at the University of Nebraska as a friend of my son. So I'm going to shout that out anyway. But Eddie,
he deserves a shout out, so we can give him.
Since you brought him up, I wasn't going to do it, but since he's a support of yours, I think that's great to hear. We talk about the power of the space. So I just have to bring this up just for our audience, because we talk all the time about you're going to face a stimulus or a trigger, and then you have a couple seconds to decide how you're going to respond. And I think it's really great that you kind of said you got to have perspective. You have to have a support network. You have to take a deep breath. You have to practice not being impulsive in how you respond to a situation where you can make it 10 times worse. I always say you have a choice when you're triggered to either add fuel to the fire or to kind of diminish it. And that takes practice, and it takes willingness to understand maybe where other people are coming from and not let them own you or live rent free in your head. So I think it takes practice to be able to handle a trigger, whether you have road rage, whether you get triggered on social media, especially when you're out there and vulnerable in the space you live in. So, and you live managing that space at a pretty high level. So, I have one last question for you, and then which is really how do we take advantage of this momentum that you have in this hot girl walk that you've developed now that's going on 4 years, 3 years since you posted, 3 years plus on it on TikTok. But how do you use that momentum to continue to build your brand and build good for the world?
Yeah, so I am very passionate about continuing to grow Hot Girl Walk. And, one of my big goals is to make social media a positive space, a space where I always picture the 12-year-old version of myself who downloaded Instagram for the first time, a space where she sees that being beautiful or being a hot girl is something that's defined by your inside and not, your outside, and that it's cool to be nice and that it's cool to be, grateful and confident and all these different ways. And so continuing to spread the message of Hot Girl Walk is, my top priority. And we have a lot of plans to grow within the next year. Our first Hot Girl Walk in Australia is April 6th. So if you have any Australian listeners, they can come to that. It's going to be a lot of fun. But continuing to grow these clubs throughout America and the world. I'm trying to bring Hot Girl Walk to every single country that we're in. And currently we're in over 190 countries. So it's going to be a process, but continuing to do that. And we also have some really exciting plans for the future that are going to be, you just got to follow along on them, I guess.
Oh, we love that. God, what I hear is joy, fun, learning to be nice, gratitude, confidence. We always talk about it to our teams and our athletes that you have to have enough talent to compete for championships or be at your best, but it's never going to be the talent that defines where you go. It's going to be all the non-sport or technical skills. And it's things like joy and connection and communication and gratitude that take a person and elevate them in sport and life. And so we're really grateful to you, as busy as you are, that you would come on our podcast and explain what the Hot Girl Walk is, why you did it, what it's about, how you're going to grow it, and how it really empowers young women and guys, but empowers young people especially, but really of all ages to set goals, be grateful, and develop an inner confidence that allows you to shine. And so that's what we hear from you, and you can see it in you, just the way you talk and the way you act and your maturity for your age. So we're really grateful to have you on the show. Jess, any last thoughts?
No, I thank you for your time. I will be assigning my athletes Hot Girl Walk, and I'm really excited. Base principles of what we teach, and then lastly, where can our listeners find you? Obviously, Instagram, TikTok. What else?
So we are on our website. It's going to pretty much have everything you need to know, hotgirlwalk.com. We're on Instagram at hotgirlwalk, which you can access through our website again. My TikTok is at exactly like the other girls. We're on Spotify. And if you're local to the Los Angeles, Miami, New York City, and I think our Hot Girl Walk is in the Gold Coast, Queensland in Australia. So if you're local to any of those areas, you can find us in person there. And I mean, we have a really large digital community also on Strava. You can join our Hot Girl Walk Club. We are the biggest walking club on Strava. So I know your athletes are probably on Strava, so that's where they can keep up with us there. But Hot Girl Walk is within you, and it's something that I started doing independently on my own. So you can find me and Hot Girl Walk on your local sidewalk.
I love it.
Love that.
Yes.
Wow. Thank you, Mia Lynn, for being on the Max Out Mindset podcast.
Thank you.
Physical abilities such as strength, speed, agility, endurance, and coordination are fundamental in sports. But mental abilities such as focus, concentration, motivation, confidence, resilience, and decision-making can heavily influence an athlete's performance, especially when it matters the most. If you want the mental edge in sport and life, check out the Max Out Mindset for Volleyball book and workbook or the Max Out Mindset for Softball book and workbook. A guide for coaches, athletes, teams, and parents to help you be in the best position to max out when it matters the most.